Hello there. This is Brian Hitzberger, your instructor for Art Appreciation Online. This is week 6 of our online course, and this is our Around the World week. So this week your readings actually took you to a variety of non-Western cultures. We looked at the arts of Asia, we looked at the Islamic world, we looked at the arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. And this is, a really critical part of this class because, of course, this is like most of the world, right? There's a lot of focus on the Western world in this class because we're Western people. But in order to to give a complete picture, a portion of the class needs to focus on on non-Western cultures, and so this is that portion. And it's inherently reductive, right? I mean, in 1 week we looked at everybody that isn't us, and then the rest of the time we're looking at us, kind of like throughout like all of history. And so, you can't do it all, unfortunately. And I think that the text, does an admirable job. They kind of go in and look at some pretty critical works from like Asian art history. But obviously, Asian art history is much more substantial than what could be kind of fit into one chapter in a textbook or even one class, right? I mean, we could devote a whole class to Asian art history and still not begin to scratch the surface. So this is, kind of a difficult thing to do, I think, but a necessary thing to do in a class like this because, of course, we want to actually look outside of ourselves. And in kind of thinking about the discussion for this week, I asked myself as a professor, well, why do we want to look outside of ourselves? And I think that this actually gets to the heart of why this class is actually included in a liberal arts curriculum at a university. It's because when we look at the cultures of other people, when we look at the artifacts of other cultures, so markedly different from our own, I think that we find unexpected similarities. There are differences, of course, because these are people who have a different background from us. They're living in a different part of the world from us. They have different beliefs. They have different histories. They have different resources, etc. So there's going to be differences in the types of things that they make, but there's also going to be unexpected similarities. And I'm actually interested in both for this discussion. For this week, I would like you to revisit your readings in the PowerPoints, and I would like you to isolate a moment when you were looking at something from a culture outside of your own, and there was a kind of unexpected resonance, like you sort of, like something felt familiar. So, as a Westerner, you might have actually been unexpectedly like, oh my gosh, this is very similar to like something I have in my life when looking at a work of Japanese art, from 300 years ago, etc. And I'd like you to actually talk about this work of art and talk about the kind of familiarity that you have with it. Essentially, of course, we're all human beings on this planet, and we have various needs and desires and aspirations and things like that, and those things are changing over history. But our artworks are always an expression of who we are. And one of the interesting things about art history is that something can feel simultaneously very far away from us and also simultaneously very near to us. And so this is really a discussion to actually explore that kind of interesting thing that happens. So revisit the works and the readings and the text. Find a work that actually felt familiar in some way, even though it is different, okay? And then talk about that work on screen and talk about why it felt familiar. I'd like you to dig deep on this. I would like you to not necessarily go with the most obvious answer. One of the things our readings go into is various types of shelter or architecture that other cultures have. And I would like you to sort of go beyond like saying like, I live in a house, these people live in a house, here's how our houses are the same, here's how our houses are different. I mean, that's kind of an obvious answer. Try and look for something that's a little bit more resonant to your own life. Maybe your research actually takes you outside of the text. One example I can think of is if you're an athlete, sport and athletics have been a part of human history as long as we've been civilized. And so I think that that's a really interesting kind of like subset of art history is like the aesthetics of sport and like how sports have actually changed in different types of cultures, how they approach athletics. And if you're an athlete in college, that's a huge commitment to your life. Like you've actually dedicated a huge part of your life to sort of like mastering and getting better at this one skill, right? There are other people throughout history who who have done this exact same thing, but what they were doing with their time and the ways in which they were doing it, they might look quite different from you, and yet they are still engaged in something that's very similar to you. So that's just one connection that I just thought of off the top of my head. And that's a little bit more personal than like, I live in a house. So spend some time with the readings, give this some thought, and be sure and post or show your artwork on screen so that we can see what you're talking about, or post it in the comments. And talk about these concepts of foreignness and familiarity. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing your videos, and I'll see you next week.